My name is Roxana, or around the world, Roxy. Around the world because in July last year, I decided to ride around the world on my 20 years old Honda Fireblade. And yeah, so I rode, so far I rode halfway around the world, which took me through 26 countries. It took me 10 months and I did 30,000 miles. So I only rode halfway around the world so far, from Scotland to Australia. And when I got to Australia, that's when my trip got paused because of the pandemic. And yeah, I guess I'll start from the start. So when I was 18, that's when I got into bikes. And this was my very first bike, Honda CBR 125, which was a great little bike. I was 18 at the time, and I couldn't wait to get my full license and get a bigger bike. So a year later, as soon as I was old enough, I got my full license, well, restricted license, A2 category, and I got this Suzuki GSX 650F. I did some of my first trips around Europe on this bike. I would just go everywhere on it. I think I've done 50,000 miles in 2 years on that bike, and I loved it. But I was still on a restricted license, and as soon as I was old enough, I did my full unrestricted test, and I got my first Honda Fireblade 900RR. It was 20 years old at the time, and I was supposed to only keep this bike for a couple of weeks. The bike was really cheap. It was not in a great state when I bought it. And yeah, I was supposed to only keep it for a couple of weeks just to get used to the power. In the end, I ended up keeping this bike for 2 years. And I did another few trips around Europe on this bike. And yeah, I ended up keeping it for 2 years. And I have done 40,000 miles on that bike in 2 years. On the bike, which I was supposed to only keep for a couple of weeks. I loved it. It was an old bike, 20 years old, but it was really simple. If something went wrong, it was really easy to fix. And I actually found it really, really comfy for touring. And I also did some track days on that bike. I would always commute to work, no matter whether sunshine, rain, or snow. And I also had another Honda Fireblade that was a bit newer, from 2008, which I used mainly for track days, weekend rides, evening rides, and I loved it, but I never did any serious touring on that. So yeah, after a few of my trips around Europe, I realized that my list of the countries to go in Europe started getting a bit short. I didn't have many countries in Europe left to go. So I found myself, when I was on the way back from one of my last trips, I started thinking, where do I go next? And ever since I started touring around Europe, they were usually just short trips, 1-2 weeks long, whenever I could take time off work. And when I was on the way back from one of my last trips, I started thinking, where do I go next? And yeah, I always had this idea of riding around the world in the back of my head, but I never thought about it seriously. It was almost like a dream, but I never really thought about actually doing it. At that point, I started thinking, why don't I just do it now? If I don't start thinking about it seriously now, I will never do it. So there were a few issues. For example, where do I take the money from? I didn't have any savings. So yeah, there were things like that I had to start thinking about. So what I did, straight away, I cut any expenses that I didn't need. I started working in some side jobs in the evenings and the weekends. I basically had no life for about 8 months. At first, I calculated that it would take me maybe 3 or 5 years to save enough money, but I really didn't want to wait that long. So I did all I could to save up as quickly, as much as I can, and in 8 months' time, I was ready to go. So this was my original plan. My original plan was actually to do the whole trip in 10 months, which didn't happen. It took me 10 months just to get to Australia, and even then I felt like it was way too rushed. But that was my original plan. Maybe plan isn't really a right word, because I don't like planning. I hate any kind of planning. I never have a set route. This is just some random scribble on the map. Actually, my route to Australia was quite similar, but not exactly the same. And this was the actual route that I did. So starting from Scotland, I rode through Europe down to Turkey, through Georgia, Azerbaijan, over the Caspian Sea to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, China, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Malaysia, and a bit of Australia. So firstly, I wanted to get through Europe fairly quickly because I live in Scotland, so it's easy enough to get to anywhere in Europe whenever I want. So I wanted to kind of skip Europe quickly. And another thing was that I had to book my crossing through China in advance. So I only had 6 weeks to get to the border with China. So I had to rush a little at the start. And I also wanted to have enough time to ride around Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan before I entered China. So this is Turkey. And then, after Turkey, I got to Georgia, which I absolutely loved. And then Azerbaijan. After Azerbaijan, I had to cross Caspian Sea, which was an adventure in its own. You can check out some of my videos on my YouTube channel. It's RTW Roxy. I've got one of my videos from the Caspian Sea crossing. It was crazy, but I was in a good company with other guys who were traveling on the bikes and on the bicycles. A lot of people tell me it's amazing what I do on a motorbike, but when I see people traveling around the world on the bicycles, I think that's amazing. They need to put a lot more effort and think about the distances a lot more to make sure they have enough water. So that's really amazing. After Caspian Sea, I got to Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan in the short was just lots of deserts, deep sand, lots of camels. I got stuck a few times in the deep sand. One day I decided to go off the main road and try to find Aral Sea, which didn't go too well. After Kazakhstan, I got to Kyrgyzstan. In Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan were some of the countries I was looking forward to the most. And when in Kyrgyzstan, I wanted to do the Pamir Highway and the Wakhan Valley in Tajikistan, which a lot of people told me, 99% of people that I spoke to told me I can't do this on a sports bike. It's impossible to do it on a Fireblade. Well, I did it, and it was nowhere near as hard as people told me it would be. It wasn't easy. I'm not saying it was. It definitely wasn't easy, but it was possible for sure. And here's a photo of my bike on the Wakhan Valley with Tajikistan on one side of the road and Afghanistan on the other. I haven't tried to cross into Afghanistan. I think it will be interesting to try it one day, maybe next time. Actually, 5 minutes after I took this photo, the road doesn't look too bad here, but shortly after, there was a short section of really deep sand, and it was getting dark, and I stopped and I looked at it, and I just knew I was going to drop my bike. And it was getting dark, so I really wanted to get quickly somewhere where I could stay for the night. And I haven't seen anyone for 2 hours. I was in the middle of nowhere on my own. And I just went for it. I couldn't really turn around. I didn't want to. I had to try. And of course, I dropped my bike. And exactly at the moment when I dropped my bike, somebody appeared. So it's luck like that. I must have been really lucky that as soon as I drop my bike, I don't see anyone for 2 hours. And as soon as I drop my bike, somebody appears. So obviously he helped me to pick my bike up, and I was good to go. After Tajikistan, I crossed back into Kyrgyzstan, and from there I crossed into China. So like I said, I had to organize organized crossing with a guide to cross China, or this region to be specific. I'm not sure if this is the case in all of China. I think it's just the west part of China, the Xinjiang region, that you need to have a guide, as well as in Tibet. I'm not sure about other parts of China. But to cross Xinjiang region, I had to have a guide. It was really expensive. I was lucky enough to be in a big group. We managed to organize a group with 13 other bikers, which made it a bit cheaper, but it still was pretty expensive for a 5 days crossing. Yeah, when crossing China, I met Mark, who I ended up traveling with for about 5 months, on and off, but roughly 5 months. I should have said that this trip was supposed to be a solo trip, and so far I was mostly traveling solo. I met up with some people along the way, whether it was locals or other people traveling on the bikes, and with some of them I ended up traveling for a day or two. So after that, I ended up traveling with Mark for about 5 months on and off. Yeah, after China, we crossed into Pakistan. And Pakistan completely blew my mind. I really didn't know what to expect. You always hear two completely different sides. In the media, you always see all the bad things. And then if you talk to someone who actually been there, who traveled there, they will most likely tell you how amazing Pakistan is. And I really didn't know what to expect. And yeah, the people were super friendly. It was amazing. The mountains, I loved the mountains in the north. Of course, you need to apply common sense wherever you go. I still think I'm more likely to get shot on a street in Glasgow when I go for a night out than somewhere like Pakistan. And yeah, here is Shimshal Valley. So when people told me that I can do a Pamir Highway or a Wakhan Valley on a Fireblade, Shimshal Valley was just a completely different level. It was one of the craziest days of my trip. And again, you can check out the video on my YouTube channel. It's RTW Roxy. And here's how people in Pakistan wear their helmets. It's not the safest way, if you ask me, but oh well. And after Pakistan, I crossed into India. And in India, I stuck mostly to the north. I wanted to do the Himalayas. Himalayas was the place that I was looking forward to the most. I wanted to do some of the highest passes in the world, such as Kardungla, which actually has been claimed as the highest pass in the world until recently. It isn't really the highest, but a lot of people still probably think it is. It is at 5,300 meters high altitude, and with my bike being a carbureted bike, it was really struggling with high altitude, with the lack of oxygen. If you go if you're at that altitude, you can definitely feel the difference in breathing. So the bike was basically the same. So it was quite hard to get to the top. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I would get to the top at all, but yeah, I was quite proud of my bike that it got me there. However, I wasn't so lucky when I tried the Changla Pass, which is at about the same altitude as Kardungla Pass. And at my first attempt, I ended up burning my clutch plates, well, 1 kilometer before the top. I had half an hour of daylight left, and yeah, the road got quite rough. So my bike was struggling with the lack of oxygen, and because of the terrain got quite rough, it was really hard to get to the top. And yeah, my clutch plates started wearing off really quickly, to the point they got burned completely. So with half an hour of daylight left, I was lucky enough that I was with Mark at the time. So both of us had to get my bike down, which took us about 5 hours in the dark and in the freezing cold temperature. We got back down, and I actually started getting worried because it was getting late in the season and there was probably a lot of snowfall coming soon. So I was thinking, what if I need to wait maybe 3 weeks or whatever for a new set of clutch plates? I will have no way out to get out of there. But the next day, I took my bike back to the nearest town, Leh in Ladakh, and I found a set of brand new clutch plates for $20 in the local market. that fitted my bike. Obviously, they were not Fireblade clutch plates, they were for Bajaj Pulsar 200 Indian bike, but they fitted my bike and I was good to go again. I was so determined to do Changla, to get to the top of Changla Pass, that I tried that again, and this time I managed to get to the top. So after India, it was time to cross into Nepal, and I absolutely loved Nepal. There was a huge contrast. In India, the traffic was just crazy. Same in Pakistan, but I think in India it was the craziest out of all the countries I've been to. And in Nepal, traffic was still crazy, but in India, what a lot of people always notice is the honking. There's constant honking of cars, trucks, all the vehicles. In Nepal, as soon as I crossed the border, it was just so quiet. Yeah, I loved Nepal in general. One of the biggest things I wanted to do in Nepal was trek to Everest base camp. And it was one of the best things I ever done. Most people do it in about 12, 14 days, I think. I wanted to do it a bit quicker. I did it in 8 days, which is not recommended because of the high altitude. You just need to really listen to your body and acclimatize properly as you go up. But I felt fine, and I pushed it a little too quickly, but yeah, I was fine. So this was one of the best things I ever done, and it's one of the things that if I ever get a chance, I would love to do that again. Yeah, and in Nepal, I rode through some suspension bridges, which was fun, and I rode through some deep puddles. And after Nepal, it was time to cross through Myanmar. And same as with China, I had to have a guide and organized crossing, and we managed to get this group together of 6 bikers. It was a 5 days crossing, and well, 10 kilometers on the last day, 10 kilometers before the border with Thailand, I ended up in the back of a truck, which, well, wasn't fun. I hit my head quite hard. To this day, I have no idea what actually happened, because the first thing that I remember was waking up in the back of ambulance crossing the border between Myanmar and Thailand, and I had no idea what was going on. And basically, they needed my passport, and they couldn't find my passport, so they tried to ask me where is my passport. So this is the first thing that I remember crossing the border into Thailand. Basically what happened, the hospitals in Myanmar were not that great. They couldn't do any x-rays, so they wanted to take me to Thailand so that they could do the x-rays. In the end, well, I hit my head quite hard, but I think it was my hip that mostly took the hit. There was just a small fracture in my hip and needed some stitches, but that put me off the road for about 3 weeks. I had to wait to fix myself and fix the bike. So I was off the road for about 3 weeks. And yeah, I decided to transport my bike because I ended up in Laos. So from Laos, I decided to transport my bike to Thailand, as I thought it would be a better place to get my bike fixed. So once I was back on the road, I rode around Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. And after Cambodia, I crossed into Malaysia. And Malaysia completely blew my mind how hospitable this country is. When I was crossing into Malaysia, I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know much about the country, and the hospitality of the people there was just some of the best. It was amazing. I spent 3 or 4 weeks in Malaysia, and out of this 3 or 4 weeks, I only ever paid for accommodation, maybe for 3 nights, if that. And people just wanted to pay for everything, for my food, for accommodation. It was absolutely amazing. Also, I got a massive support from Honda Big Wing, who serviced my bike for me. And actually, at that point, I had quite a few issues with my bike. For example, losing compression, with the valves losing compression, needed new stator, new rectifier, lots of bits and pieces. So that was amazing. And after Malaysia, I needed to ship my bike to Australia. And here is my bike, how wrapped up, ready to be put on the plane. to Australia. And then I landed in Australia, which I absolutely loved. Until that point, I was riding mostly through the mountains in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, northern Pakistan, then Himalayas, then in Thailand, maybe not as high, but it was mostly mountains. And then when I got to Australia, it was, when I first saw the ocean, it was amazing. I had to go for a swim as soon as I got there. And yeah, I ended up swimming in the ocean basically every day. I absolutely loved it. Few weeks after I got to Australia, that's when the pandemic started. And at first I didn't really think much of it. I didn't really follow the news. And after a few weeks, well, that's when all the borders started closing down, and even the regions within Australia started closing. And I thought, well, maybe in a few weeks' time it's going to be over and I will continue. And I got to a town called Esperance in Western Australia, where I was supposed to stay for 2 nights. And that's when the news, that's when we saw the news that they're going to put all the regions in Australia in lockdown. And I ended up being stuck there for 2 months. After a couple of months, I realized that it's not going to be over anytime soon. And I decided to leave my bike in Australia and fly back home to Scotland and go back to work, save up some money, and then continue my trip. So that's what I did. But since then, my original plan was I would leave my bike in Australia and fly back there maybe in March next year. But now it looks like Australia isn't going to reopen maybe until the end of next year. So I decided to actually ship my bike back from Australia back home. And in 2022, I'm planning to restart my trip basically from scratch, but taking a different route. So now my plan is to ride through Europe, through Russia, Mongolia, Japan, and South and North America. So that's it. Just quickly, I wanted to say thanks to my sponsors, Moto Gusto, RI, RK Chains and Sprockets, Rocky Creek, and Oxford. My trip is mostly self-funded, but it's a massive help. So thank you very much, and